Hey kids, this is Ivan. Today I wanted to talk to you about how weapons work in my particular campaign. And some of this stuff may change a little bit, but I'm going to play test it somewhat. But this is what I've come up with for weapons for the most part. And so I'll just talk about that. First and foremost, there are no weapons restrictions based on class. If a wizard wants to pick up a sword, go right ahead. You're not going to be really good at using it, but go ahead. And the same thing for clerics. I'm not big into them not using edged weapons. I think that's an artifact of the game. And they're holy warriors, and of course history is replete with clerics or priests or whatever using daggers to cut out people's hearts and all that kind of wonderful stuff. So I don't mind a cleric using an edged weapon. I don't think that really makes a big difference in the game, and it's an artifact of the game back when the bigger weapons like swords did actually larger amounts of damage, especially versus large creatures. So there are D4 weapons, things like daggers and what have you. There are D6 weapons, there are D8 weapons, and there's even D10 weapons. And those are those really large weapons that would cost you an entire encumbrance slot because they're just really, really big. And it's not so much that they're heavy, they're just hard to carry around. And that would be things like longbows, because they're as big as you are. And halberds, pole arms, all that kind of stuff, really long spears, etc. Fighters are the only ones that ever get to get extra attacks per round, and so I'm kind of mimicking first edition. So at 6th level, a fighter would get 3 attacks every 2 rounds. At 12th level, they get 2 attacks per round, and at 18th level and up, they get 5 attacks every 4 rounds. The other thing I'm letting fighters do is specialize in weapons. I may change when it happens from 5th level to 4th level, but at the moment I'm having them get their first weapon specialization at 5th level, and the second one at 9th, the third one at 13th, the fourth one at 17th, and the last or 5th one at 21st level, should they live that long. What a weapon specialization does for you is a few things. It gives you +1 to your attack bonus with that weapon. It also gives you +1 damage with that weapon. It also increases your armor class when using that weapon by +1 versus one opponent. If you're doing any special stuff with that weapon, which I'll talk about, the OCR method I use, if you're trying to disarm somebody with a flail, you'll get one better shot at doing that. Keeping people at bay with long weapons, all that kind of stuff. It also increases your chance of doing a critical hit. So if you're single specialized in a weapon, now you're going to do critical hits on 19 and 20 for the most part. You can get up to triple specialize in any given weapon if you'd like. The thing that happens with armor class, as far as that's concerned, is you can get +2 to your armor class versus one weapon, or versus 2 opponents. You can split that and be +1 versus both opponents. If you're triple specialized, you can use that +3 to your armor class versus one opponent, or +2 versus one and +1 versus another, or just +1 versus 3 different opponents. So that's kind of what I'm doing with the armor class with those sort of weapons. The other thing I'm doing is the old dual wielding stuff. Now I'm letting everybody dual wield, but fighters have the best chance of doing it, and I've done it by weapon size. So if you're using 2 D4 weapons, you're going to get a -2, -2 to your hit rolls. If you're using a D6 and a D4 weapon, then you're going to get -2, -3. If you're using the standard, like longsword and dagger, a D8 and a D4 weapon, then you get the classic -2, -4. But if you're using 2 D6 weapons, because they do the same amount of damage overall, you also get -2, -4. If you're using a D8 and a D6 weapon, that's going to be -3, -5. And should you be using 2 D8 weapons, like 2 longswords or something like that, then you get a -4, -6. Everybody else gets 2 worse to that, except for thieves, who can, as I've talked about in the skills area, they can assign pips to the point where they're one less as good as a fighter, or in fact just as good as a fighter in terms of dual wielding, should they decide to spend their precious skill points on something like that. Certain weapons also have some certain neat effects, outside of the good old, flail to disarm and stuff like that. A longbow, which has a better range than a short bow, also is kind of a strength bow. So you're going to get your strength modifier to that in terms of damage. So if you have a 17 strength, you're going to get +2 damage when using that longbow. And crossbows, I'm taking something right out of Lamentations of the Flame Princess, Where a light crossbow, which takes an additional round to load because they're hard to load, they ignore 2 points of armor in terms of, like, if the person's wearing armor, if the creature has natural armor, that sort of thing. It ignores 2 points of that armor class. And a heavy crossbow, which takes 3 rounds to load, actually removes 4 points from armor in terms of armor class, that sort of thing. So it's a pretty powerful weapon in terms of, it's slow to use, but in fact it allows you to have a better chance to hit. The other thing I'm doing for fighters to kind of replace that damage versus large sort of thing is I'm letting them, with certain large creatures, increase the damage die. So if you're going to go use, say a D6 weapon versus a larger creature like a troll, well, now it's a D8 weapon. And, you're going to use a D8 weapon, well, now it's a D10. D10 weapon might now become a D12 weapon. And if you're using them against super large creatures, dragons and giants and all that stuff, they get to go up two entire damage pips. So if you're using, like, one of those big weapons like a halberd, you're not going to do D10 or D12. You're going to do 2D8. If you're using a D6 weapon, now it's going to be a D10 weapon. And this is just for fighters, and this kind of mimics their ability to do more damage because they're fighters and they know how to use these weapons better than anybody else. So that's pretty much what I'm doing with weapons. The only other caveat is, of course, like, if you specialize in a weapon that's a D4 weapon or a bow, you're not necessarily going to get that plus to armor class, because there's no way you're going to be able to use that effectively, to reduce or increase your armor class versus that one opponent. I may do some other special stuff for bows in terms of rate of fire or stuff like that, or point blank range, or just decreasing the range it takes. So you don't get that -2, -5 to hit. But that's pretty much what I'm doing with weapons at this point in my game. And of course, if you use a weapon that's not normally a two-handed weapon and is big enough for you to use both hands, and long swords really wouldn't qualify. Something like Bastard Sword would, a really large battle axe, really honking, big mace or Morning Star or something like that. If you're to use this weapon two-handed, then you just get +1 damage when you hit somebody. So most of the stuff is pretty standard. A little bit of the stuff is a little bit wacky, but that's what I'm doing with weapons.